As we all know, every day, all over the world, migrants embark on perilous journeys to escape poverty, conflict, the ravages of climate change, discrimination, and other human rights violations. Some yearn to reunite with family members and loved ones. Others seek improved living and working conditions, while many hope to find safety and dignity. Yet, a disconcerting global trend prevails, where many states prioritize deterrence, securitization, and criminalization over the protection of migrants' human rights. The implementation of increasingly restrictive migration policies, bolstered by fortified borders with walls and fences, and accompanied by limited pathways for safe and regular migration, often compel migrants into dangerous, irregular journeys, rendering them more vulnerable to human rights violations and abuses. Along borders, as we will discuss today, migrants and human rights defenders have reported discrimination, racial profiling, disproportionate use of force, arbitrary detention, family separation, gender-based violence, among numerous other human rights violations. These injustices gravely weigh on individuals already mired in vulnerable situations, with undocumented migrants bearing an especially heavy burden. Impunity only serves to compound these dire challenges. But borders represent more than mere lines on the map. They are places where countless lives hang in the balance. Behind every statistic lies a unique individual with dreams and hopes far too often lost to tragedy. The prevailing impunity for human rights violations committed by security forces, as well as non-state actors in the context of migration, is deeply troubling and requires urgent progress towards accountability and redress. States hold the prerogative to govern migration within their jurisdiction, yes, but this must be done in strict conformity with international law. The primacy of human rights and non-discrimination must underpin all border governance measures to ensure that migrants' human rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled, regardless of their status, how they arrive at the border, where they come from, or what they look like. The use of force by law enforcement officials should be regulated as a measure of absolute last resort, strictly exceptional, and that always adhere to human rights standards, including the principles of legality, necessity, proportionality, and non-discrimination. Any alleged use of force violation must undergo prompt and independent investigation and prosecution. It is imperative to emphasize the critical need for ensuring that victims of human rights violations have effective access to justice and the means to seek remedy. These are fundamental rights that must not be compromised, and their realization is essential for the protection of the human rights of migrants. Additionally, as systemic instances of racism, xenophobia, and other forms of discrimination against migrants remain widespread, and as divisive and dehumanizing anti-migrant narratives persist, we must confront these deeply ingrained biases heads-on. In closing, I would just like to acknowledge the crucial role played by civil society organizations and human rights defenders joining us today in advancing these vital principles and values. Their unwavering dedication and relentless pursuit of justice are the driving forces behind the positive change we seek. It is incumbent on all of us, migrants, governments, the UN family, civil society, and relevant stakeholders to build a world where everyone's human rights are protected, justice prevails, and human dignity knows no borders. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Carolina. So we are here as a border delegation because in border communities, which are more than a line in the sand, but 15 million people living in the US-Mexico border region, all of us are subject to extreme militarization by law enforcement forces at the local, state, and federal level. So this impacts not only migrants, especially migrants, but also and especially people of color, people of African descent, Latinos, and especially people of Mexican descent. For us, the problem or abuse by law enforcement in the United States begins with discrimination, leads to inhumane treatment, then violence, and then impunity. Every stage is a violation of human rights. Every stage. And what we are most concerned about is a culture of exception, exclusion, and excuse for not complying with international human rights obligations. In our border region, we have Customs and Border Protection, CBP, which is the mother agency for Border Patrol. CBP is the largest law enforcement agency in the country. It's the largest law enforcement agency in the country with over 60,000 agents. Those agents are engaged in abuse at every level, and that impacts all of us. We have here today some stories to share with you of how CBP has engaged in abuse, discrimination, and impunity. And we have stories of local police. And while there are many tragedies, there's one problem, and that is the use of force standard in the United States, which is deficient and deadly. And that standard is objectively reasonable. We will have my colleague from Berkeley explain why that is so problematic in the United States. As a result of a deficient and deadly use of force standard and a culture of violence and impunity, we have a border agency that has existed for 100 years now, in which thousands have been killed, 270 in the last 10 years, and not a single agent in those 100 years has ever been convicted for killing somebody while on duty. Zero, never. Every year in the United States, over 1,000 people are killed by police. We're seeing record levels of police killings, even after the George Floyd-inspired social movement in the United States. Last year was the deadliest in a decade. Over 1,000 people killed. That is, to put into context, more than the number of people killed in Mexico, Canada, all of Europe, Japan, Australia, combined, right? Law enforcement in the United States, because they have such a low standard for use of force, are quick to use it. There's no requirement of de-escalation. There's no requirement of minimum use of force. That compounded with the fact that border agencies are legally allowed to racially profile in border communities. Police just do it anyways. Leads to a very dangerous situation for those of us living in border communities, especially people of color. All of these numbers and statistics are important, and they tell you a pattern of abuse. They tell you about the depth of the problem. They tell you about the trend that we're seeing. Things are getting worse, even in this administration. But I think what may be more impactful to you is to understand what this kind of abuse looks like on the day-to-day through an individual account. So I want to introduce Ted Womack, a community member from San Diego, who can share his experience with local police. What is it like on the day-to-day, Ted, for you to live in San Diego?
Thank you, Andre. And thank you for creating the space, and thank you all for coming today. As you said, my name is Ted Womack. I'm here with the Dignity Delegation and Southern Borders Community Coalition. And I want you all to understand that, when we have this conversation about law enforcement and what happens, a lot of the times people act like having the conversation is the issue. But the issue is actually what happens to me and to many other people on a daily basis, right? A lot of the time what that looks like is you could just be going throughout your day. You could be at a park, you could be walking to go get lunch, You could be driving to pick up your kid from school. You could even be in an emergency situation and going into a hospital to see somebody. But unfortunately, law enforcement will see you, or see me particularly, and target me because of the way that I look. My first experience with police officers in San Diego unfortunately taught me that I'm not to be protected by them. I was 16 years old and I was told to go home from a gym where I was playing basketball out with my friends. There was a disturbance there that they came to check on that had nothing to do with me and my friends, and they knew that because they saw us arrive there. But as we left, an officer began to follow us in his patrol car. And when I noticed that, I sat down because I didn't want to be followed home. I thought I was following an order. But as soon as I sat down, the lights lit up, they pulled up on me and said, "Why'd you do that?" And I said, "Well, it looks like you're following me. Like, I don't want to be followed home by you." He arrested me and put me in the back of the car and said I was impeding an investigation. And that was my first experience with law enforcement, with police, as a 16-year-old. I didn't know what was going on. I was really confused. I was really scared. And I didn't know what was going to happen, honestly. My friends went to go get my dad, and I really don't know like how it happened, but my dad so happened to know this guy, so he got angry with this guy, and he ended up letting me go. But no teenager or anybody in general should have that be their first experience with law enforcement, with the people who are supposed to protect you and serve you, but they're actually putting you in a situation of fear. And it just continued from there. I literally lived one street over from a park, or used to live one street over from a park. Our house would be here and the park is here. And just me being at that park, police would approach me and ask me why I'm there. I wouldn't be doing anything specific. In fact, it's a park connected to an educational complex. So it's not like that's a park that people can even go and do anything else at other than study or like make connections and things like that. And multiple times at that park, right by my house, police would ask me, "Why am I here?" Detain me, try to figure out who I am, try to figure out if they have a reason to mess with me for any way or reason at all. And that started to become a normalcy for me, just as a teenager. I didn't know what to think. I just thought it was regular for police to bother us. And as I got older, I felt like something needed to be done about it. I felt like this is wrong, but I didn't know how to articulate that. I didn't know even how to get that thought out. So unfortunately, I continued to have more experiences. One time I was driving my car. It was a pretty old car. As you know, older cars don't always perform the greatest. I was sitting at a light and an officer pulled up next to me. I looked over out my window, he looked at me. As the light turned green, he turned his lights on, got out of the turn lane, came into my lane and followed me and pulled me over. When I asked why I was being pulled over, he said, "Well, I could hear your music from your car." My speakers weren't playing much. My speakers were broken in that car. So that was just another interaction of me, seeing examples of why I can't depend on these people who are supposed to protect me, who are supposed to be there to make sure that I'm safe and uphold the peace, to do that for me. There's even been times where, again, in a traffic stop, I'm pulled out of my car, I'm detained for no reason, and they always want you to sit on a curb, to demean you, it's like humiliating. And I asked one time, I feel like that's humiliating. I don't want to be demeaned. Like, I'm perfectly fine with having a conversation with you. He said, "Okay," and put me in the back of the police car. And that's just one time that happened. And there's too many examples of these circumstances where people like myself, black and brown kids, are exposed to law enforcement mistreating them just because of who they are and what they look like. And it's a tragedy, and it's not something that's just my story, right? So many kids in San Diego, in Los Angeles, in the Valley, and in other places along the border deal with these same things, right? And yes, it's in traffic stops. Yes, it's in walking stops, but many, many, many times it's a police interaction. The police come and engage you without any kind of need or want, or even people calling. There was a time where one time I was passing the school that was in my neighborhood. My dad is a security officer there. I frequent the school. I'm at the school a lot. The staff knows me, the people know me. And as I'm passing the school, I wave to my dad, normal business. By the time I get behind the school, like going back towards my house, there's 3 or 4 police officers in the alley with guns drawn on me. And they're saying, oh, you made a threat at the school. I was utterly confused. I was lost. I was scared. Like I was going to die that day. Because all I did was wave at my dad, but now there's cops. I don't even know where the cops came from. And as the situation unfolds, the administration come out and my dad comes out. And so there's the school staff is out, there's officers out there, there's school security out there. And they're just like, what's going on? And they're like, well, somebody made a report that this person was making threats at the school. And all the staff said, nobody called the police. That's the security officer's kid. No one called the police. And they said, well, we got a report that there was threats. And they talked amongst each other for a minute, and the whole time, like, guns are drawn still. Like, they never stopped to put their guns away. Like, guns are still drawn on me during this whole conversation. After about 10 minutes or so, they just go away. Like, they say, oh, okay, bye, get in their cars and drive off. Nobody apologized. Nobody said, oh, like, we messed up. Nobody said, we got a false report or anything. They said, oh, bye, and disappeared. Like, nothing happened. And that shattered me. Like, I cried all the way home. My mom called me because, of course, my dad told her what happened. She called just to make sure I was okay, and I couldn't even speak. Like, I couldn't even say words. I was hyperventilating, I was crying, and it just everything. And more than everything else, I was just disappointed that I was made to be a victim, you know? Like, I was already past the point of understanding that law enforcement will do these things. I was at that point already. I was already at the point that, you know, I understand law enforcement is not for me, but I don't think there's ever a time where anyone would enjoy feeling like a victim, being made a victim because of somebody else's mistake. And, okay, bye, and it doesn't matter. And it happens too many times for us just living our lives. Like I said, waving to my dad, walking down the sidewalk, breathing, waking up in the morning. I'm discriminated against because of how I look, because of who I am. And like I said, this is thousands of people's story. It's not just something that's only happened to myself. It's not just something that only happens in specific situations. This is a regular, everyday occurrence for people. Whether you're in your car and they walk up and they don't ask you about registration or insurance or if you have a license. They ask you if you're on probation or parole first. They don't ask you your name or anything. Are you on probation or parole? Next question, can I search your car? Regardless of what the answer was. So any one of us could have said, no, I'm not on probation or parole. All right, well, I'm going to search your car. Can I search it? No, I don't want you to search my car. I don't consent to search. Well, if you're not breaking the law, if you're not doing anything wrong, there shouldn't be an issue with me searching. You don't have anything you don't want me to find, right? No, I just don't want you to search. I want to go about my day. It's like, well, we can call the dog, and we can get the dog out here, and that'll take about an hour, so you want to wait an hour. And then that creates a situation where people consent to searches without wanting to be searched, because they don't want to be inconvenienced. Who wants to sit for an hour because they're innocent and they know they're innocent? What about when I have to go to work? This has happened many times when I've had to go to work, and I can't afford to lose my job. So it's like, all right, just search. I got to go. You know, and it shouldn't be like that. I shouldn't be threatened or intimidated to be searched just because someone wants to search me, wants to figure out if I'm doing something wrong, or just create a reason to make it look like I'm doing something wrong. And they go out of their way to do so. Whether it be they see you and they turn around in traffic, or they see you and stop everything that they're doing to come approach you and ask you questions about why you are where you are. Anything, even to the point to where they will talk to minors. I got pulled over picking up my sister from elementary school when she was 10. And they asked me, what am I doing on this side of town? Picking up my sister. He starts to ask my sister a question. I immediately say, can you stop, please? She's a minor. I'm not her parent, I'm her big brother, and I don't consent to you to speak to her. He said, do you have an ID, ma'am? Can I see your ID, please? And my sister's 10 years old. Like, she didn't know that she didn't have to do that. And she pulls out her school ID and hands it to me. And I got upset because I'm like, no, you don't have to do that. And I started yelling because I'm like, why are you asking a 10-year-old for an ID? But that's regular. And like these are regular occurrences that happen so many times, and that's why we're here. Like we've appealed to the right avenues and we've talked to the right people. I've tried to make complaints for myself and they told me, no, that's not nothing to complain about. That happens to me. I'm not allowed to advocate for myself. So if I can't go through the right avenues and call them and make a formal complaint, if I can't use my local government to make a complaint and make things right, if we can't use our state government to make things right, our federal government to make things right, we had to come across the seas. We had to come across the seas to talk to you all about this because, like I said in the beginning, whenever we talk about law enforcement and accountability, the problem is, or they act like the problem is, having the conversation. When actually the problem is the things that occur to us every single day that we can't talk about because, oh, well, you must have done something to cause that. Or you must have been doing something that created a situation. You must have been in some sort of trouble. No, that's not the case. Got my license when I was 18. By the time I was 21, I probably got pulled over more than 100 times with no ticket. Not because I was speeding and doing crazy stuff, no, because I was black in my neighborhood driving my car. And that's the day-to-day experience for all of us. It's not just my story, for all of us. And we just want it to be different. We want to have dignity. Like, that's why you see all these stickers. We want to have our dignity back. We don't want to live this kind of life. It's not a life that I want to live. It's not a life that I want for my son, for any of my relatives, for any of you all, I'm sure none of you would have liked your first police experience to be being arrested for following instructions. But that was me. And here I am now so that we can try to make sure that that doesn't happen to anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ted, for sharing your experience. Your experience, as we know from the data that we have and the shadow reports, the summaries of which you have in front of you, that this happens every single day to many, many people. Right? We know that an estimated 1 million people in the United States are threatened with or subjected to force every single year, and that's probably an undercount. That leads to over 250,000 injuries, over 1,000 deaths, none of which or few of which are held accountable. And so, how do we stop this cycle of violence, right? And how do we interrupt this continuum that starts with discrimination, starts with what Ted has described, leads to inhumane treatment, threats of violence, acts of violence, and then impunity? That's the question that we're here to talk about, to engage with the diplomatic community, with the United Nations, with the Human Rights Committee, because we have, in the last year in particular, we have stopped seeing the U.S. Constitution as a remedy. We now see it as a floor, not a ceiling, for where we should reach. And we now understand human rights as the new horizon that we should reach for, because we have now come to really internalize the dignity that we have and that we feel and that is inherent to us. And we understand that in order for us to close the gap between U.S. laws and policies and those human rights that we seek, we have to do more. We have to reach into the international system. So I want to turn it over to Roxana Altholz from the UC Berkeley Law School's International Human Rights Clinic, who can share some more about the problem and the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Ted. It's really an honor to be on this panel with you. For the last 7 years, with my co-counsel, Andrea Guerrero, I've represented the family of Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, one of about 270 migrants who have died in fatal encounters with border agents in the United States since 2010. On May 28, 2010, Customs and Border Protection agents detained Anastasio a longtime resident of San Diego. He had lived there for more than 2 decades. A father of 5 and a Mexican national. CBP agents denied Anastasio medical attention and the right to file a complaint against the agent who assaulted him. Border agents said that Anastasio did not behave like a typical alien, but talked loudly, looked at them directly in their eyes, and formally complained about his treatment. By insisting that he be treated with dignity, Anastasio had created a problem for the agents, so they decided to deport him immediately. He was taken to a secure area, secure federal area, for removal to Mexico, where from approximately 9 p.m. to 9:25 p.m., at least 8 CBP agents and ICE agents punched, kicked, dragged, tasered, and kneeled on Anastasio's neck and body, while at least 9 additional agents, so a total of 17 agents, and dozens of onlookers watched, and some of the civilian eyewitnesses recorded the incident. Today I'll address a question that has haunted his widow, Maria Puga, his family, and his community for the last 13 years. How can 17 agents of the nation's largest law enforcement agency beat to death a man in public in front of dozens of witnesses on videotape without consequence? And I wanted to start just reading testimony from his widow. This is from the shadow report that we submitted before the Human Rights Committee last month. She wrote, in 2015, 3 years after a second video was made public, the U.S. Department of Justice told our family that they would not pursue criminal charges against the agents. They repeated what the federal agents had said before, that Anastasio was aggressive, even though the video refuted this, and that agents' actions were justified. This was devastating. It was a slap in the face. I only discovered there was a grand jury proceeding after it was concluded. I never received information about the grand jury, including the outcome of the proceedings, the witnesses, the version of the events presented to the jury, or the prosecutor's recommendations for charges. Nothing. During the investigation of Anastasio's death, it appeared as if the government agencies were only investigating what they wanted to find and hid what was in their favor to protect the agents from accountability. The video was clear. Anastasio lay defenseless on the ground while agents brutally beat him. They ignored the evidence. After this experience, I lost complete faith in the U.S. legal system. U.S. laws and courts failed to protect Anastasio and his family's fundamental rights by failing to hold law enforcement accountable for excessive use of force. The system had worked as it was designed because it was designed to shield, it is designed to shield federal law enforcement from accountability and not protect the civilian population from law enforcement brutality. One of the root causes of violence and impunity in this case and many other cases is that our laws are deficient. Currently, there is no federal statute on use of force in the United States. Law enforcement's use of force in the United States is governed by Supreme Court interpretations of the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution to prohibit force that is objectively reasonable. That is not objectively reasonable. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, the objective reasonable standard lacks precise definition. Rather, courts must engage in a balancing test. Balance the nature and quality of the intrusion on individuals' constitutional rights against the importance of the government interest alleged to justify the intrusion. So let me interpret what that means. It means that U.S. law on use of force fails to provide meaningful guidance to lower courts, attorneys, and litigants about whether and when law enforcement's use of force is justified. It means that the Supreme Court creates a balancing test rather than bright line rules. It is legal in the United States, for example, to use deadly force against a fleeing suspect. In the United States, the assessment of whether the force was lawful focuses on the perception of the law enforcement officer and whether the officer believed the behavior of the person was threatening. The protection provided by U.S. law on use of force and the right to life of the civilian is extremely narrow. In contrast, international human rights standards on use of force are guided by the imperative of protecting the right to life, a supreme, non-derogable right from arbitrary deprivation by the state. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights require that state agents only use force that is legal, necessary, and proportional, and as a last resort. State agents must always, under international standards, use persuasion and de-escalation tactics. The decision to use force must also be free from discrimination. So let me point out all the ways U.S. law does not meet those international standards. First, the objective reasonable standard, the U.S. law enforcement, focuses on the reasonableness of the officer's belief, not the reasonableness of the officer's actions. In the United States, an officer's use of force can be justified even if the force was not necessary to control the situation. Under the U.S. standard, the officer's use of force may be justified even if the force was not proportionate to the threat. Necessity and proportionality can be easily disregarded when the focus of the inquiry is on the reasonableness of the officer's beliefs. In practice, what happens is the focus of the legal inquiry is on the reasonableness of the officer's fear of the suspect. And that brings me to my second point. The assessment of whether the officer's fear is reasonable can be predicated on racial bias and stereotypes. Despite the prevalence of racism in U.S. society, especially against Black and Latino suspects, who at a societal level are associated with aggression, violence, and criminality, U.S. Supreme Court opinions fail to acknowledge the significance of race. A third point is regarding whether less deadly alternatives are available to the use of force. Most U.S. courts deem that juries should not consider whether less deadly alternatives are available. Courts do not want in the United States to second-guess law enforcement, even when it means ignoring the totality of circumstances. This also undermines the necessity requirement, because it's difficult to argue that force is necessary when less deadly alternatives are available. And lastly, not only is the availability of less deadly alternatives irrelevant under U.S. law to the assessment of lawfulness of use of force, prosecutors, judges, and juries also do not consider the officer's intent, the injury or the harm caused by the use of force, whether the officer wrongly assessed the level of threat, or the perspective of civilian witnesses. U.S. law takes no account of law enforcement incompetence or overreaction or bias. In effect, U.S. law gives the officer the benefit of the doubt. U.S. law favors law enforcement over civilians. So it's unsurprising that use of force is on the rise and the shield of impunity in the United States is virtually impenetrable. We need to reform our laws. We need to change when and how and why law enforcement officers are legally authorized to use force, or law enforcement will continue to kill with impunity. Unfortunately, the federal legislation that was proposed after the George Floyd uprisings has stalled in Congress. Fortunately, President Joe Biden can act and should act now. He should lead the way to reform by reforming use of force standards applicable to federal law enforcement agents, including Customs and Border Protection. President Biden should issue an executive order that brings use of force policies into compliance with international standards by authorizing use of force only if it is necessary and proportionate. The United Nations has an important role to play in this, in spurring this kind of reform. Until now, the United States has largely evaded international scrutiny of its laws. It hides behind the Constitution in international venues. Indeed, no international body has issued a determination on U.S. law on use of force and whether our laws abide by international standards. That is why we're here in Geneva. We are urging the Human Rights Committee to issue a finding that U.S. law on use of force, specifically the objectively reasonable standard, does not conform to the ICCPR. And we are urging the committee, to specify that legal reforms must be taken to bring U.S. standards in line with the principles of necessity and proportionality. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. I think that until and unless we change that standard, we're going to continue to see the kind of violence that you're going to learn about from Marisol Garcia Alcantara, who was fortunate to survive a shooting by Border Patrol, but unfortunate to now live with the consequences of that brutality. She is a survivor, and there are many more who have not survived. This situation that we have of brutality and violence and abuse, impunity in the United States is not something that we can train our way out of. It's not something we can hire our way out of. It's not something that we can address by changing a culture of policing in the United States. It drills down to a root cause, which is the use of force standard. We can never lose sight that that is the root cause of what we're seeing here today. Marisol, I want to invite you to share with us what happened to you and what are the consequences that you now live with.
You want to just go?
Yes, and if you could translate for her.
Okay.
So you'll have to share a mic. There's only one mic.
Okay.
So why don't you use your mic?
Okay.
You only one.
Se habla y ya va. Okay. Pero de su Okay.
Maybe you could shift a little to the left.
Yeah, it's working.
That's working.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Marisol García Alcántara y yo soy víctima de la patrulla fronteriza, ya que el 15 de junio del 2021 un agente de la patrulla fronteriza me dio un disparo en la cabeza.
Good afternoon, my name is Marisol Garcia and I'm a victim from the Border Patrol. In June 15, Border Patrol shot me in the head.
Bueno, pues me disparó en la cabeza en Nogales, esto pasó en Nogales, entonces pues, de ahí me llevaron al hospital, me operaron.
And this situation happened in Nogales, Arizona, and after that I was transferred to a hospital where they made a surgery in my brain.
Me operaron y después de 2 días después de que salí de la operación, me llevaron 22 días a Florence, un centro de detención, y pues ahí no me atendieron, no me dieron ninguna atención.
After my surgery, I was transferred to Florence, which is a detention center in Arizona, and I didn't get any medical treatment.
Después de esos 22 días me deportaron a México sin ningún antecedente médico hasta que llegué a mi ciudad y fue cuando pude ir al hospital y ya me dijeron que todavía tenía los fragmentos de bala en la cabeza.
After 22 days when I was in the detention center, they deported me to Mexico. And it was until then in my country when I found out that I still had a piece of bullet in my head. And they didn't give me any release of my medical file or any medical support.
Hoy por hoy vivo con miedo que me den ataques epilépticos, pues esa es una de las consecuencias que ocasionó el balazo. Y pues pérdida de memoria, insomnio y me dan ataques de ansiedad.
One of the main repercussions for this is that now I might suffer epileptic attacks, and also I suffer a lot from anxiety and insomnia too. Those are the main repercussions.
Bueno, entonces, eso es algo de lo que a mí me pasó, pero pues la razón por la que estoy aquí personalmente es porque quiero buscar justicia, quiero que nos ayuden a que alguien nos escuche para que pare todo esto.
The reason why I'm here is because I want to seek justice and I want to be heard, and I want this situation to stop.
Pues que pare, porque por fortuna yo estoy viva, pero hay personas que no lo están, entonces que ya no haya más, o sea, ya.
Thankfully, I'm alive, but there are many of others that are not alive, and that's why I want this situation to be over, to stop.
Entonces, bueno, esa es una de las razones por las que estamos aquí, porque estamos buscando justicia. Y más que nada que paren, que ya no haya más.
That's one of the main reasons why we are here, and basically we want this situation to be over and to stop.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
So now you know our story. If you are part of the diplomatic community, we seek your help to bring condemnation to the United States for failing to comply with the use of force standard that they obligated themselves to long ago, more than 30 years ago, when they signed and ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And whether it's through the ICCPR, through the Universal Periodic Review, through the Human Rights Council's work, resolutions, special mandates, special procedures, whatever those are, please consider what you can do to engage the United States to align its use of force standards with the international standards. Until and unless we do, we're going to keep hearing these stories. If you are part of U.S. civil society, now you too know the story about what's happening at the border, which is happening all over the United States, but it's compounded at the border because we have not only local and state law enforcement, but we have the overwhelming presence of CBP, the largest law enforcement agency in the country, which is concentrated in our border communities. And if you are from the larger NGO global network, we seek to ally ourselves with you in the fight for dignity, because we have come to understand how important that is. So, it was a long journey to come here. I mean that in every way. I want to invite your reflections, your questions. We have available the people who have shared their stories. And I like to say, if you live in the border region, everybody's got a story.
we've shared some of them. There are a lot more. So just ignore this. And please, we welcome your reflections, your thoughts, your questions, your answers.
Really quickly, I just wanted to say thank you again to everybody who came here today just to hear us speak, just because, again, we can't advocate for ourselves like this at home. We had no choice but to come here to do this. Like all of us, there's a very mixed group of people here. These are very high-level professional people. I'm a community member, she's a community member. There's high-level people here with us. We've all made complaints through the formal avenues in which we are supposed to do them. And nothing ever happened. We're not the only people who's made these complaints. We're not the only people who have stood up to say, hey, like, this is happening. I want to let you know about it so we can change this and do something about it. And each time the conversation is, no. Because, again, when you speak about changing anything that has to do with law enforcement, people are up in arms, people get scared, people act like we want to stop people from being able to police. No, we want people to be able to police better, actually. We want people to actually know that police can protect them and will protect them, and border agents will stand up for them and will fight for their rights. But unfortunately, we've showed you and told you that that's not happening. It hasn't been happening, and they don't have any initiative for that to start happening unless somebody is putting them under a microscope. And we need help. We need help. We need a lot of help, and that's why we're here. So again, any comments or any kind of questions that anybody may want to ask, we're fully available. But I just want you to put yourself in the shoes of all of those people who go through these things every day, right? Imagine being scared to leave from your street, your home street where you live. Imagine being scared to leave your street because you know you're going to get pulled over and something's going to happen. You don't know what, something's going to happen. Got to go to the grocery store, might get pulled over. Got to go pick up your kids from school, might get pulled over. Got to go do a job interview, might get pulled over. Got to go to the mortuary because my family member just died, might get pulled. It doesn't stop. There's no situation where we get a break or where we can feel like we're not going to be subjected to humiliation, harm, dying. Like, somebody has to do something. And it's been happening for so long and nothing has changed. So we just want them to do something. And we've laid out the options that they can do. So thank you.
Bueno, pues al igual que Ted, les quiero agradecer mucho a todos y también les quiero pedir por favor que nos ayuden, pues ya no queremos más muertes, ya no queremos más discriminación, ya no queremos pues más accidentes.
I would like that. I want to thank you all for being here, and also we ask you for your help because we don't want any more deaths. We don't want any more discrimination, and that's why we're here. And we ask for your help.
Entonces, si por favor, si aquí hay alguien que nos pueda ayudar, de verdad se los agradeceríamos de todo corazón, y no nomás nosotros que estamos vivos, sino los que ya no están con nosotros. Yo sé que desde el cielo también se los van a agradecer mucho.
And from the bottom of our hearts, we really thank you, and if someone can help us, we're gonna be very, very thankful, because there's not only for the people who are here, because for those ones who are no longer with us, they're also gonna be very thankful for the support that you can give us.
Muchas
And thank you very much.
Thank you, and my sincere thanks to Marisol, Ted, Andrea, Rosana, and everyone in the room for being here, for sharing your stories, your experiences, and for allowing us to be part of this movement. From the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, only maybe very few brief reflections. I'd like to echo the call for norms, policies, and practices to be aligned with international human rights law, including those regarding the use of force. And we are here to join you in this call. I would also like to underline the importance of giving visibility to these stories and to these experiences and to provide data. And in that sense, to recognize the work that you're doing in bringing this now to the Human Rights Committee, but as you said also, Andrea, to other mechanisms within the Human Rights Council, with the treaty bodies, at the regional level, at the national level. This is what is allowing us really to identify what is happening, understanding, and seeking to prevent this from happening again and to make a change. We need to move away from this trend to criminalize and securitization and criminalization of migration towards one that is placing individuals at the center. And just a final call for transparency on operations, but also on investigations so that we can actually move towards justice and accountability, and we're joining you in that call for justice regarding human rights violations of migrants and communities at large. Thanks.
So in closing, I also want to thank you. I want to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for creating this space and for all of you for being here and listening to our story. You can learn more about our campaign in the United States at startwithdignity.org or at empiezacondignidad.org. And you have stickers on the table so you can go straight there. We are sharing our stories as we're producing them. We're sharing our stories on that site. We're sharing our calls to action. We invite everyone to join us both inside and outside of the United States to move us forward to honor and protect human rights that are ours, each of us, without exception, without excuses, and without exclusions. With that, we will close this event. We are available for any questions or any conversation, and we will look to put some of this media content out on our platforms at Start With Dignity. Thank you again, and hope you have a good day.